Hi guys, Jimmy McIntyre here and welcome to another YouTube video. Firstly, I apologise for the sound quality. I'm still travelling through New Zealand and I've booked myself into a hotel just to record some tutorials, and I'm afraid the room's a little bit echoey. So apologies if the audio doesn't sound very good. In this video, we're going to talk about darkness and how it influences the mood in our images. In many of my landscape photos, I like to create a nice dark scene which centers around a strong, powerful light source. Now, I don't do this with every photo, but I do have a soft spot for that type of scene. One of the hardest things for us as photographers to do is to decide how we want to balance the light in any given scene. For me, the shadows in an image are one of the strongest influences for the depth of mood in our photo. Not only can shadows increase the depth of a scene, they can also shape and frame the image, just like this image in front of you. For example, we have these large mountains around the image and in the center of the image, but they're acting almost as silhouetted frames. And the real action is down here in the sunset and the light that's funneling through this area here. Yet for me, it's the shadows that emphasize those brighter areas. So that's why I darkened this image significantly. However, one thing you might notice is that although this is a very dark image, we have no true black in the photo. Just looking at the histogram here, you can see we're miles away from clipping any of the shadows. And there are very few upper midtones. Basically, our midtones have been pushed and shoved all the way so that the majority are much darker midtones. And we have no clipped or underexposed areas. To show you what it would look like if we did underexpose the image, it would look something like that, which still is quite impactful, but now the shadows are so overwhelming that they're taking away the power of the brighter sunset area. Let me show you another two examples of this. Here I shot the Milky Way at Nugget Point in New Zealand, and the only area that I chose to brighten up was the Milky Way. The rest of the image is extremely dark, and just like the last image, you can see we have no clip shadows, but we have a lot of darker midtones. And the reason why I did that is to simulate darkness to some degree. When you have a moonless sky and no city lights around, there shouldn't be any highly contrasting areas in the foreground. There are no strong sources of light projecting onto the path, and so there shouldn't be any strong shadows or strong highlights. So that's why I've gone for a softer contrast, to simulate a softer, lack of contrast nighttime image. And more importantly, so that people focus entirely on the Milky Way. On this next photo, again I went for a really dark scene, but no clipped shadows. And simulating the other two, the darkness in this image is pushing the viewer's eyes to the brighter, stronger light source. And then when we do that, we're then pulled down to the water which cuts through the image, and then this little guy sitting on the side of the rocks. All around here, on the outside of the image, if I just make a new layer, all around here on the outside of the image is extremely dark. And that's because it doesn't add to the image itself. There's nothing really here that adds to the composition. It's nice in terms of framing the photo, but we don't necessarily want our viewers to look at it. So with all this in mind, how do we go about darkening our image without underexposing our shadows? If we look at this image, for example, we can see that it's very bright, and as soon as the viewer looks at this image, there isn't any real guidance as to where to look. And it has the potential for much more mood, but at the moment it doesn't really have any. We have some nice colors in the sky and a beautiful reflection, but I think just with a couple of contrast adjustments we can make a huge difference here. So the first thing I would do to target just the midtones is to open up Raya Pro and go to the luminosity mask section of Raya Pro. If you don't use Raya Pro, you can use the easy panel, which is free, and the link to which you'll find in the description of this video, or you can use your favorite luminosity mask software. Then I'll choose Create All. Once the luminosity masks are created, I'll choose something like a midtones 3, and I'll look at the mask just to make sure that the midtones are selected and the highlights mainly aren't selected there, and the shadows aren't selected either. If I'm happy with midtones 3, I can turn off the mask and open up a levels layer. The first thing you'll see here is the midtone slider, and I bring this all the way down. Now I still want to increase the contrast in the sky, so I'll increase the brightness so that we increase the overall contrast. And we're not just darkening the image. Now you'll see the sky along here looks much better. It's maybe a little bit too dark, so I can bring down the opacity a little bit. And I think the foreground is a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to manually mask out the foreground. And now with that one little change, that one small change, you can see we've deepened the mood in our image significantly just by pulling down the midtones in the sky. In some images, although it probably won't work for this one, we can open up a levels layer again and really drag the midtones down and pull up the output levels here, the left slider, which is your black point, and just drag it up. And then we can pull the midtones along to the right again. And this lowers the midtones in our image, but also leaves us with a kind of glossy effect as well. And so once we're happy with this base level of contrast, we can then continue with our workflow, adding local contrast, maybe a vignette, brightening up certain areas and dodging and burning. But these two very first steps in editing the photo have immediately added more mood to the scene. Going beyond midtones, we can also choose to darken our shadows and our highlights. For example, in this image here, we have some really strong highlights where the sun rises. And it actually looks okay, so I don't really mind it too much. But let's say we wanted to darken that sky. Well, there are different ways to do that. My personal preference, if you're a Raya Pro user, is just to go to Enhance, Enhancements, and just click Darken Sky. And you'll see, not only has it darkened the sky, it's given it far more richer colors. And in this situation, it's probably a bit too much. But I'm just going to bring down the opacity just to show you the sort of effect we have. And I'm going to mask out the foreground, which has also been affected a little bit. So now we have a darker, richer sky. Now, if you don't have Raya Pro, that's okay. There are lots of different ways to do this. We can, for example, open up our favorite luminosity mask generator and create some bright luminosity masks. And I can go to my channels, or I can go straight to the brights selections in Raya Pro and choose, let's say, brights 3, and have a look at the mask to make sure we're selecting the highlights, which we are. And then I can turn off the mask and just open up the curves layer and bring the curve down. And you'll see we're darkening the sky nicely. And again, if that's too much, we can just reduce the opacity. And like I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a luminosity mask generator, you can always download the Easy Panel, which is free and which you can find in the description of this video. And finally, another great way to add depth to your image is by darkening the shadows. And this time we're still not going to underexpose our shadows, but we're going to stretch them out a little bit just to give our image more depth and more mood. Now I've already done that with this particular image. You can see the shadows on the outside here of the image in the water are much darker. You can see the shadows on the tree here are much darker, and along here, and along here. And the reason why I darkened these particular areas was firstly to give the image more depth, but also to frame the image as well, because the sky along here frames the image beautifully, and so it seemed to complete the image when I framed the image nicely at the bottom as well. To darken the shadows, I keep it really simple. I just open up a curves layer and bring the midtones down again, not the shadows, because that would darken the image too much. Just the midtones. And then once I'm happy with how dark the midtones are, I select the mask of the curves layer, I press Command and I or Control and I to invert it, and I choose a white paintbrush and just paint in the shadow. And if it's a little bit too strong, I just reduce the opacity. And like I say, this image has already been fully processed, so any extra shadows I add might be a little bit too much here. But I hope you get the idea. And that's it for this week's video. Thank you for watching, and apologies if you're used to the shorter, quick tutorials that I do and you weren't expecting a longer video. But anyway, I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to sharing more videos with you next time.